This is the third reading material that I've asked you to engage with this week. The first being a review of our chapter 6 text. The second being that connection between explicit instruction and social, emotional, or behaviors that Dr. Shelley Moore, I gave you 2 pages from her book. This last one is the article that I asked you to read called Cracking the Behavior Code. And I've also given you 2 references to the books by those same authors if you're more interested. For some of you, this might be a review. For others, this might be the first time you're hearing of specific instruction for teaching executive functioning skills, social emotional learning, or especially how to deal with challenging behaviors. I've given you some critical concepts also on this slide that are a more simple review of what I'll go over with you about the article, and then also some review on the next slide. The article introduces the acronym FAIR, F-A-I-R, that stands for the function of the behavior, accommodating students in order to remove some of the barriers or deal with the communication behind that behavior, interactions between yourself and the student and their peers, and the last one being response. What is our response and our peers' responses to those behaviors? I think one of the most important parts of this article is the way that they walk through each of those steps, but also how they list out specific accommodations for each type of theme of behavior. So if you haven't already engaged with the article, this might be something that you'd like to download and keep for your reference, because I find that very applicable, very practitioner friendly, and very easy to use. The other important thing is, as an adult, being able to step back and identify the function of the behavior. It's really, really important, because once you can kind of emotionally remove yourself from however challenging that behavior might be and determine why or what is being communicated or what's happening behind that behavior, it's much easier to create a plan to change the behavior. You can reduce triggers to that behavior. You can explicitly teach replacement behaviors to kind of connect back. You can explicitly teach a student how to get their needs met more appropriately and make it easier to implement once you understand the function of the behavior. Another thing that really spoke to me was the emphasis in this article on providing student choice, making sure that students hear a choice rather than a demand. As the instructor or adult in the room, making sure you're asking the appropriate questions. For example, when you give choices, make sure you can live with both choices instead of using yes or no or command statements. Lastly, I have a really excellent example. When I taught at the high school up until a couple of years ago, I had probably one of the best paraprofessionals that ever existed. I call her the super paraprofessional. She was amazing in every way, calm with students, could anticipate. She was not a trained teacher, but she had all of those teacher skills. Her name was Deb. And we had a student with some very challenging behaviors that include some violence, some lashing out at adults. And we always knew the triggers and we could always see it coming. And we determined that it always usually started verbally. The student would engage, argue, yell, be irrational, those kinds of things. And I will never forget one day, about the second year we were working with this student. So we'd kind of figured things out. And Deb was working with this student and things started to escalate verbally. And I just kind of had my eye on things. We were in the same room working together. And she turned to me and looked at me and said, "I don't know why I'm arguing with her," the student. And I laughed and we laughed. And then the student started laughing. And it surprisingly de-escalated the entire situation. The fact that Deb was able to recognize that she could really only control her behavior and that she was escalating the situation by engaging and arguing with the student which was going to end up in a major behavior meltdown. When Deb recognized that about her own behavior, I think the student also recognized it about her own behavior. Humor erupted, de-escalated the situation. Not exactly the FAIR system, FAIR, not applied in any sort of systematic way, but kind of a little glimpse at how, as adults in the room, we need to have a plan, we need to have skills, and we need to intervene and make sure we're not also contributing to that behavior. Remembering that we can manage the antecedents, which is what Deb was trying to do. We can reinforce the desired behavior, which is what Deb was not doing. And we can teach a replacement behavior, which I can say after Deb stopped and said, "Why am I arguing with this student?" She immediately took a breath and started to use the replacement behaviors that we had already established for that student. We were really working to use explicit instruction with that student to teach the communication behaviors and skills she needed so that she didn't escalate further. And it worked. It took time and it took a lot of effort, but we were able to respond to inappropriate behaviors in a different way to change things. Again, this article really talks more about more specific and challenging behaviors than the examples I gave from Dr. Shelley Moore's pages from her book in the previous slides. I'd like you to think about that while we move into this next application piece, that this topic of student engagement, supporting student engagement, is more appropriate sometimes for students who aren't exhibiting challenging behaviors, but need explicit instruction in order to engage in better ways. But it also can be used in systematic, collaborative ways to deal with some of the intense, challenging behaviors that we see. Keep looking. I've got some examples from some IEPs and how to use this in the next couple slides.